conversation, but before they do, I wanted to set the stage just a little bit, just to kind of frame this conversation. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Paula White, and I'm the executive director of JerseyCAN. And JerseyCAN has a sole mission, which is to ensure and work to have every child in the state of New Jersey have access to a high quality of education, regardless of their demographics, regardless of where they live or what their family income or any other demographic marker may be. And so all of our efforts are really for that purpose. I am a traditionally trained teacher. I attended Spelman College. I was in the classroom for the better part of 10 years. And I founded a public charter school in the South Ward of Newark. And I have led school improvement for the state of New Jersey for over 200 traditional public schools across the state. I've done various things in education, but at the end of the day, I consider myself a teacher, and I consider myself really just thinking about teaching and learning. So with that in mind, I'd like to just share a couple of slides that will sort of ground us to help us to understand what it is that we are concerned about and why we're concerned about it. So let's go ahead and get our slides up. If you will be kind enough to give us a minute, we will take about 3 minutes with our slides, and then we will get initial remarks from our senators and we will move on. So let's go to the next slide. So I wanted to just make sure that everyone kind of has a little bit of a timeline of what this has looked like for our state. We administered the NJSLA, which is the New Jersey, our learning assessment, which is mandated by the federal government, that each state, administers an assessment so we can see how our students are doing. And that testing window for the paper-based test was back in April, the end of April, from April 25th until May 6th. For those who took it computer-based, they had a wider window, which was April 25th to June 3rd. So before the school year wrapped up, all our students in the state of New Jersey had an opportunity to take that assessment. And then later on, this past late summer, each school in each district got reports, and those reports were delivered to the districts by September 9th. And the districts had to release and have some conversation about their scores by actually November 9th, which the districts have done. And so what we're talking about here is not do parents have their individualized student reports, because they do, and that is wonderful. Not do districts have their reports to see how all the schools in their district did, because they do, and that's really important. But what we do not have is the big picture. How did every single district and school in our state of New Jersey do, as well as can we dig deeper in the data and see how did our subgroups do? How are our special education students faring? Especially given all that we have been through. How are our Black students faring? How are our Hispanic students faring? How are our white students faring? How are students in South Jersey faring? North Jersey? So all of these different ways that we can look at the data, but in order to do that, we need to have the comprehensive data set, and we do not have that. And so that is really the conversation that we want to get into today, so we can start to think about what are the implications, both short-term and long term for this. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, yeah, actually we can move forward to the next one. That's great. Thank you so much. And so you can't see, it's not as big as I'd like it to be, but I wanted to share with you, of course, there's been lots of conversation about the NAEP data. We do have nationally representative data on how New Jersey students did on the NAEP test, which they call the sort of nation's report card. And so we know that our African-American students, our Hispanic students, in particular, have lost a lot of ground. And we do know that there are achievement gaps for all of the reasons that we know and that we have been talking about. But this data gives us some sense of what is going on. So for example, we know that there are 44% of the white students in our state are proficient in 8th grade math. That is 10% of Black students, 16% of Hispanic students, and 67% of Asian students. So you can see that just knowing the high level overall average will not let us know, for example, that there is a 34% difference between white and Black students, or that there is a 23% difference in proficiency between Asian and white students, for example. So this is the power of being able to see the data at a really disaggregated level based on subgroups. And if we go to the next slide, we can see, the same sort of thing for our reading results. We can see that there is a gap of 30 points, let's say, for example, between white and Black students. So we can look at this data all sorts of ways. So I wanted to just share with you, what does it look like to drill down and look at the data? It even breaks it down, male students versus female students, students who are eligible for the school lunch program, as opposed to those who are not. And for those who don't know, if you're eligible for the National School Lunch Program, it is an indicator of your socioeconomic status or, levels of poverty. And so these are the kinds of ways that we want to be able to look at our state level data in the same way that we can look at our nation's report card data for the state of New Jersey. Okay. And so now we can, come from the slides, and I want to give our panelists an opportunity to just introduce themselves and just give sort of an initial thought about where we are in this conversation and how you're thinking about it at this time. So I am going to pass the mic, if you will, over to Senator Ruiz.
Thank you, Paula. Good evening, everyone, to my colleagues and longtime friends as member panelists. Thank you for joining this conversation. To all of you listening, I think the number one question, Paula, as you described it, where are we in New Jersey? And the answer is we don't know, because the numbers have not been released. Anyone who knows where my passion and my force has been committed to, it's always been in education, because I fundamentally believe that if we get to the core of providing excellent pathways to every single human being in the Garden State, all of the other policy issues that we deal with from a legislative perspective will kind of go to the wayside. The fact that there is a member from the New Jersey Business and Industry Association on this call with us right now is a clear indicator that there is a true fusion between what happens in our school districts and where is the employability of the future New Jersey taxpayer. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, the numbers have not been published this year. It has been brought to my attention that perhaps it was to generate a more robust presentation, and I'm hoping that is the case. But we know that it's very late. And the problem with the lateness in the receiving of the data is that I think people who are against testing always want to think in this form that testing is for punitive measures, and it is not. It is for the mere fact of having a checkpoint. For instance, a child is sick, you use a thermometer. Is it time to give them Tylenol to reduce the fever? We need to look at our data infrastructure and our school systems precisely in that way, not for punitive measures, because in no way, shape, or form does it impact the child in a negative way from being promoted into the next grade level. It does not take away from the expertise and the greatness of the teacher leader in the classroom. In fact, what it's supposed to do in a very quick way is to say to teacher Ruiz, Vin is struggling in these areas, and then he and I should be working on an individualized learning plan so we can figure out how to bring his student growth up in the next couple of years. what has transpired, and you saw in the national test scores, is not new to many of us who represent districts that have been underperforming for years. The achievement gap in the state of New Jersey is very real. And that's why, for the friends who are on here, they know that when someone stands up and says New Jersey's #1 in public schools in this country, I almost have this immediate reaction to vomit, literally, because we know that that is not the truth. I want New Jersey to be #1 in closing the achievement gap, and that's where our strength should be. And I think that when we get these numbers, all of us in a very courageous and uncomfortable way can figure out how we truly bring the students who have been most struggling and those who are in need back up to speed and close the achievement gap in the state.
Always great to see all the panelists on here, and especially the best education chair the state has ever had in the Senate, my good friend, Senator Ruiz. But Paula is doing an incredible job already here at JerseyCAN, as well as all my other colleagues here, Chris, Vivian, and Dr. Davis, for their respective work. Obviously, we have a lot of challenges. And we know that the purpose of, as Senator Ruiz has said, the purpose of testing data is not to blame anyone if we have disappointing results. Everyone understands the conditions under which testing is occurred, especially during the pandemic. We know folks sometimes just aren't naturally good test takers. We know there's a lot of circumstances outside the household. I had a young girl in the middle of her class during COVID. She was crying because she was hungry. She wasn't even getting the one free and reduced lunch during the day. That child is not expected to be penalized based on what her standardized test scores are, but it's still important that these tests happen and that we have an understanding of where we are for baselines, because we know that the pandemic impacted student learning despite educators' best efforts. And again, something I want to emphasize, it's not no way an attack on teachers or educators or I mean, they're doing God's work. We have some incredible folks here. We got a huge teacher shortage. And we have a lot to be happy about. I always joke that I love that people always say they're ready to move out of New Jersey, but they only do it after their kids leave the school system. They don't want to raise their kids in South Carolina or Florida. So only after their kids graduated, they do. So we have a lot to be proud of, but we shouldn't ignore things that aren't looking good. As the majority leader said, there are going to be statistics that aren't good. There's going to be achievement gaps that we need to close the gap. I'm a huge proponent of high dosage tutoring. I think it's extremely important. I think tutoring plays a big role, especially in communities where that child might not be coming from a great environment, and they're going to need those extra steps and those extra tools. Tutoring plays a huge role. I think we need to look at things like that to see how, when we get these test results, where exactly we are. So the data can guide our response to the pandemic and help ensure we're providing the necessary support to both students and educators. So I think we have to look, and we shouldn't be afraid of what data comes. We shouldn't be afraid to say, well, the data, we shouldn't even see it. We shouldn't have it. It should be whatever. I think that is not helpful to anyone. And it's not in any way meant to be punitive on any students or teachers. It's meant to simply succeed. Thanks so much.
You're on mute, Paula.
We know that there have been valiant efforts, for folks across the spectrum, our educators and so on. So I think that's really important to acknowledge that, and I do appreciate that. We are going to move to our resident CEO of the Urban League, Vivian Cox-Fraser. Please share your initial remarks.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm really excited to be on this panel with folks that are doing the work in education to improve opportunities for families and children in our state. And I just have to echo what Senator Ruiz says. When you hear that data that says New Jersey has the best schools in the country, it really you just have a sinking feeling, because you know how many children are really being left behind. And I think you'll have to think even around There was a study done in the 80s around called The Nation at Risk. And that's when the governors came together and said, oh my gosh, we can't compete globally because our workforce isn't prepared and what to do. And they started instituting a lot of standards around testing. And I certainly understand fears that people have about how testing might be utilized either against children, because in our community, we have had experiences with tracking and things like that. And also, teachers are sensitive that, oh, if children don't do well, don't test well, then there's implications on them. But I think even if you go back to that original study, there's implications to this nation. If we don't respond to the crisis in education, and certainly COVID certainly highlighted other disparities, but and you think about the learning loss and the devastation to young people who were learning remotely. We had preschoolers in urban league. We have programs from early childhood all the way to seniors. We have college preparation programs, and we see that many young people in urban areas checked out. Some of the teachers said they didn't see them the whole pandemic. There are students that weren't logging on. Maybe there was an internet broadband access issue, but also there was an issue around COVID affecting families because they were living in close proximity to one another, the housing issue. So there's a whole intersectionality to achievement and economic opportunity. And those are really the disparities that we want to address. And you can't, I said, when I spoke to Paula before, I said, what gets measured gets done. And I think we have to not be afraid of testing, but I think as communities and parents, we have to demand it, right? Because otherwise, sometimes parents say, oh, I really like my teacher, she's really nice and everything. Okay, but how are your kids doing? How are they, what are not just their grades, right? Because we also have issues in urban communities with sort of grade deflation and kids being passed on, right? So they have challenges early. We don't address them and we pass them on. So even if they're not reading at grade level by grade 4, what's going to happen to them when they go to 8th grade? They're not going to be able to do algebra. So really, I think we have to, as Senator Ruiz said, we got to be courageous. We got to be able to have difficult conversations, and we have to take the blinders off. And I certainly want to see that data because I know that COVID has really impacted the communities that the Urban League serves more significantly. So I want that glaring data to show up. I know it shows up in the NAEP scores nationally, but I'd like to be able to say, what's happening right here in the state. And so if you don't disaggregate the data, it gets glossed over with the data that we have the best schools in the country. So really excited to get that data, really be able to analyze it. And then more importantly, use that data to help young people, to help the children in our community be successful.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Dr. Davis, you spent all day in a school, so you're on the ground. And so we definitely want to hear from you as well, just your initial thoughts and perspective on this issue.
Yeah, thanks. Being on the ground is fun, and I'm still on the ground right now. So pardon me if my voice is a little cracky, but we're getting through some things here. I want to say good evening, everyone, and thanks to all the panelists for being here and really allowing for this conversation to happen. Having leaders that have the policy decisions at the tip of their fingers is important for us to be able to add resources and solutions that are on the ground. My name is Dr. Dowayne Davis, and I'm the CEO of Phillips Academy Charter School of Paterson. Just for a little bit of context, after serving in PK to 24-year-old public school settings for majority of my career, I joined Phillips that serves 510 students in grades K through 6. And I personally chose to work at Phillips because every day I get to work alongside dedicated educators who are working relentlessly to provide what we think is rigorous, relevant, and differentiated education experiences for all students. But we're doing so not without the focus on cultivating healthy relationships that foster for what we believe are really important developmental characteristics for the whole young person. And for a little bit more context, we serve a community that's 90% of our students of color. 90% of our students' families qualify for free or reduced lunch. We touched on that a little bit earlier. and 13% are classified with some form of a disability. Sometimes there might be multiple, and 8% are English language learners. So while this notion of learning recovery has spread across the state and the nation, learning recovery is not necessarily a new concept in urban education, right? I left playing in the National Football League because I wanted to serve young people that needed me the most, right? That needed young educators that they could see themselves in, that see them beyond what they could see of themselves. And so I started this work to give back to my community. And so the educators in urban districts have worked for decades trying to close the achievement gap, right? While using data-driven decision-making has been scientifically central to our united struggle in making up for learning loss, that's whether due to subpar education or lack of resources. And now, right, the effects of a pandemic. We've been doing that. We've been working relentlessly to close those gaps in very innovative ways. And so this concept of learning recovery guided by data and understanding where our students are, it's been central to my work as an educator, and much of the work here for folks that are on the call and looking in. It's more important today because there are so many opportunities. When you look at the folks that are here on this call, Senate Majority Leader Ruiz and the work that she has done to just support education across the state, we have great opportunities ahead. And there are challenges that we've all faced together that are related to the public health challenges. And so I'm thankful for being here. Our team is doing fantastic work on the ground that's connected to healthy academics, but also healthy mental health for our young people as well. And so knowing what our holistic data as a state looks like, for me, is going beyond the silos of a classroom that innovates because it has access close to its data, a group of teachers within a school that's innovating because they have closeness to their data, or a city looking at it from a state standpoint. How can we create a statewide professional learning community that can tap into the genius of different schools that are doing great things with peer groups and peer communities?
Excellent, thank you. And then we are moving on then to Chris Emigholz. Thank you so much from our New Jersey Business and Industry Association.
Thank you very much, Paula. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much to JerseyCAN for doing the great work improving education in our state that you've been doing for years. And BIA is always happy to partner with you guys. And thank you very much. And BIA is here, and Majority Leader Ruiz said it very well. I mean, the future workforce of our state depends upon the success of our K-12 system. And yes, there are bright spots, and you can see that in the data, but you can also see that education for all of our students is not what it needs to be. And we hear that from our members, and businesses will say, we can't find qualified employees. We can't find employees that pass basic skills tests. We can't find employees that have the technical skills we need to work on a manufacturing plant or to whatever jobs are in healthcare, in finance. We're having trouble finding people. And so if we have the data, and data is good, more data is only better. And so we have to have the data. We have to have the transparency to see what's working and what's not. And as whether it was No Child Left Behind, whether it was when I was a classroom teacher in Atlanta, Georgia, right around the corner from where Paula went to college in Spelman. I taught at Booker T. Washington High School in Teach for America. And you remember using data to diagnose what my students were doing well on the Georgia graduation test and figuring out how to improve their test scores so that more students are graduating. Data is a friend. Data is a good thing for government. It's a good thing for teachers. It's a good thing for students. And we shouldn't be afraid of it. And testing is a way you get more data. And if you didn't have testing could come in lots of forms and lots of different ways to get it. But testing allows you to better diagnose what's going well and what's not going well in your schools. And then it better allows you to focus on the areas where we need it. And whether that's weakness in the STEM technical areas, which the workforce needs, weakness in writing, which the workforce needs, weakness in just getting kids to graduate. We need more graduates. And we need more kids going into apprenticeships and the trades. We need more kids going to college, you name it. But we have to know where we're doing well and where we're not. And so, again, data is good. More data is better. I hope the data comes out soon. Data is powerful, and it only helps us. And I'm proud to be on this panel because I know that there's very few people in the state Senate who've ever done more than Chairman Gopal and Majority Leader Ruiz for making our future workforce better. And then knowing what charter schools like Phillips Academy and whether it's Dr. Davis's charter school and other charter schools, and the Urban League, the training programs, workforce development programs, the kids that they're giving opportunities that otherwise wouldn't. I mean, we need more of that. And I'm excited about the discussion tonight to talk more.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. And so I think that in these initial comments, we have answered the question that I know some people have been thinking about in the community, which is, look, we all went through a pandemic. It was a rough patch. Can we just put this in the rearview mirror and move on? Why do we need to, sort of go back and look at test scores? We know everybody's sort of lost ground. Why are we sort of thinking about this at this point, right? Are we going to Monday morning quarterback this issue, if you will? But from what I've heard from the panelists, we've come to consensus that we are not indicting anyone, but we want to have information so that we can have a sense of where to go next. And in the absence of that information, it makes it tough. And so, I think that the next part of the conversation is really to kind of take a step back. We do have a question that came in from our audience, which we're very appreciative of. Keep the questions coming. And that question was, what were we doing to address the achievement gap before COVID? What were we doing in the state? Were we resting on our laurels, or were we working on specific things? So I will, with Senator Ruiz, who used to chair the Education Committee, I would love for you to take a stab at that question.
Thank you. I think it was Dawn who shared that, and I'm sorry if it was not, because I was looking at it and I thought it was one of the greatest questions to come in early on this topic of conversation. I consistently said that the pandemic did not create learning loss. The pandemic forced colleagues and policymakers to understand that so many of us who've been talking about this issue, that it is actually legitimately real, because for the first time, it was bleeding into zip codes that had never understood what summer slide was, what learning loss was, what social emotional strains and learning. I remember my phone ringing off the hook. What are you going to do about this? What are you going to do about this? For a decade, I've been talking about what has been facing some of our school districts. So to the question is, what were we doing prior to COVID? Not enough. That is just the basic truth, not enough. The achievement gap in the state, and this is why I want to see these numbers. I want to know how much more did the achievement gap grow? But the truth is the achievement gap was so particularly stealth in a way that if you didn't want to see it, you could turn in another direction. But what COVID did was lend power to that agenda that so many of us have been screaming about, to say, this is truth. This is why data matters. And so we were not doing enough. We think about this and everybody wants to lens it. Well, how do we do it? Look, tutoring is phenomenal. We do know that it works best when it's the actual teacher in the classroom who's doing that high dose tutoring. That's the best model. We know that we can't do that enough because our professionals are exhausted and tired of being creative, and we need to support them as best as we can. Because when we think about the classroom in the lens, we're focused on the child. We also need to understand that there's a human being who's standing in front of them too, that went through all these same experiences themselves, right? Either getting sick or having a child that wasn't going to school themselves. But let's get outside of the COVID pandemic frame. Let's talk about learning loss and its existence in the state of New Jersey that's been in perpetuity for a long time. Why do we still go to school on an agrarian calendar in this country when it does not benefit our working families and our students who don't have access to resources? We know that a child that's not going to a camp during the summer or to an intensive summer learning program that sits at home idle, not because the family doesn't want to expose them to these things, but they're focused on paying the rent, paying the electricity bill, and putting food on the table. When that child goes back to school in September, they've trickled back. That is the reality of what's facing our families. Why are we not having courageous conversations about what other countries are doing that would help our families fare better? I know that I saw districts this year pop up with summer robust, intense programs. They were not as well attended as in the year before, but the first year post-pandemic, our schools were busting at the seams, but not every single district was doing it. And that's why the data from the state matters. There was a question that came in from one of the greatest education reporters. Why do you need this? Because it supports the policy when we're screaming for it to say that, quite frankly, you don't need a legislature to write a law to say we should have considered allowing families to make the decision you know what I would have done? Let's be clear. I would have called it the extra plus year. If you wanted your child to stay back, and I wouldn't even say stay back, if you wanted your child to repeat it for normalcy and to bring back up to speed, we would have called it first grade plus, second grade plus. Students in cohorts would have stayed together. There wouldn't have been that stereotype of, oh, you stayed back or whatever it is, that decision-making process. But that requires a lot of courage, and it requires a lot of uncomfortable conversation and resources. The difference that we have here that we didn't have before in attempting to close the achievement gap is the funding. And this is a once in a lifetime opportunity that the longer we wait to see the numbers, the money keeps going in different avenues without us realizing what is the best on our return on investments. We need to figure out a system of, I'm sure there are school districts that would be willing to consider looking at the calendar year in a different way. We need to look at summer programming for all students who are not in a resource family. We need to have strategic kindergarten boot camps that generates a positive nature. So when our children are transitioning from universal preschool into kindergarten, that they're ready and set to learn in the summer. We need to talk about infant and toddler seat accessibility, and we need to make investments in the womb. And so it is much broader than just what is happening in the classroom, but back to the question, we were not doing enough. And so we need that data to support policy, but most importantly, to tell the department and the state to say, these are the facts and this is the truth. What are we going to do collectively together to make sure that every child has an opportunity to reach their 100% human potential?
I appreciate that answer. So, the long and short of it is that we have been doing, we have been doing quite a bit of work in our state. As I said, I led school improvement for the state of New Jersey, and there has historically been someone in that seat to mind that aspect of the shop. And so I want to switch to a question that I have before, and then we'll go back to an audience question. And that question is, when we think about the New Jersey Department of Education, the vision of the New Jersey Department of Education is to strengthen teaching and learning in New Jersey in order to achieve educational equity. And so my question to you, Senator Gopal, as you sit in the seat where you are, chairing the Education Committee in the Senate, what is your sense of how we might work best with the Department of Education, or what you would ideally like to see them do more of, or what are you happy that they're doing now? However you'd like to respond to that. But what is that role, and how are you thinking about that in terms of them realizing that vision of driving education equity across the state of New Jersey?
Sure, that's a great question. The commissioners change. The governor has had 2 now, and Governor Christie had a number of commissioners, starting with Commissioner Schundler. So they change, staffs change. One thing that I have stressed to the governor's office is to continue to hire more staff. More staff at DOE would help. More folks engaged would help. I'd like to see the state, and this is in partnership with the DOE, actually look at a long-term strategy for education in the state across our 580 plus school districts, across our charters, our parochial schools, and really a K-12, just like, a town does a master plan, counties have master plans. I'd like to see a master plan here. Even when we looked at the charter schools, we saw under the Christie administration, it was a very aggressive, let's just expand. We've seen in the Murphy administration very status quo. Approve every approval, but don't really expand. And it doesn't seem overall very strategic, right? We've got some Chris, my colleague here at BIA, spent years on the local Board of Education. And I'm sure there at the local Board of Ed, they had a strategic plan on what they were looking for their district for the next 5, 10, 15 years, as far as personnel, teaching, increased in special education programs, STEM programs, all that stuff. That's what we should be doing here. It should be statewide. It should have regional impacts. It should look and where folks are doing well, where there are school districts doing well, they should be rewarded, and where they're not, they shouldn't. I know of charter schools that aren't well, that shouldn't be around. I know some charter schools that are doing great, that they should be expanded soon. I know some public schools that are probably some of the best in the country. I know others. I have one in my district where the culture is so bad between the teachers and the administration, and it's hurting the students there. And so I'd like to see DOE come in and really do a very aggressive strategy across the board, engage stakeholders, and try to put together a master plan, essentially. And it's not something we have to stick to year by year. Things are going to change. No one would have predicted COVID, but some kind of guideline to help us get to where we have to get to. I think another important piece is how we can increase teachers. Yeah, we know the average starting salary of a teacher in New Jersey is about 50,000 or so. They're lucky over 30 years if they see six figures. You can go work in your local municipal public works department and see a better salary quicker. So I think we need to do more to do that. On a side tangent, I mean, when we look at a lot of the things, I'm looking at some of the comments here, and this is not one of the questions on how do you make teachers feel more appreciated. This is none of this conversation that we're having here today. I'm not going to speak for all my colleagues, but I'm pretty sure just knowing them speaks anything negative towards teachers. Teachers do an incredible job. Like, COVID happened. That is a truth. To pretend that it did not happen and things were not shut down for a year does not help anyone. It does not do a service to just pretend like something didn't happen. And there's a lot of politics outside. We've got politicians out there that are trying to say that teachers are sexualizing kids in the third grade. And we've got politicians that want to put cameras in the classroom, every classroom. We've got some really dangerous thing that's hurting the teaching profession way more than us saying, hey, we need to look at the stats, we need to look at the data, we need to see how we can get an action plan moving forward. And many of the things Senator Majority Leader Ruiz talked about, in addition to looking at strategic tutoring options, in addition to looking at, hey, maybe things we can do around math or science or different areas once we see that data where we're really lacking. We have that one-time federal funds right now where we can utilize to do specific, very creative programs to get us to where we have to. So I think it's a little bit of a full court press.
Paula, I would love to connect a tangent on Senator Gopal's response, and I'll be quick. In terms of the NJDOE's vision, right, to really achieve equitable education across the state, I think about our greatest unit of change in terms of student achievement, right? It's not our principals, it's not our middle level managers, it's our teachers in the classroom. We understand that the workforce right now that we're looking to develop with our young people are future focused, but there's a workforce right now in our education space that's barren, right? There are many barriers to entry for very willed, skilled, relevant, and caring adults that deserve to be in front of young people. And we need to break down those barriers of entry, right? Like a business model, right? How do we creatively utilize funds that can, one, speed up the certification process, right? For folks that have the ability, that have the cultural relevance, have the competency, the skills, that might be deterred because this is an elongated process, or there are fees that I need to go through, or how do I utilize my experience and my knowledge to grant certification to be eligible to become CE certified, right? And how do we provide fee waivers? How do we also think about, for what like other states also do, what percentage of the overall staff population could be non-certified? And this is a thought, right? And over time, they are allowed to become standardized or certified based on experiential knowledge. We see it in the CTE world. We see it in other domains. And so how could we innovate within this space right now with the dollars that we have, diverting resources and funds into places that can allow for more skilled, will, and relevant adults to be in front of kids that can be the greatest unit of change? I just wanted to
Thank
make,
you so much for that. Yeah, no, I do appreciate both of those comments. I know, Superintendent Leon in Newark, so large districts, medium-sized districts, small districts, everyone is concerned about being able to usher in folks into the teaching workforce as needed. And so certainly to the extent that we can think about that more broadly. I think that that's something that is really important. And also this notion that Senator Gopal talked about, really just sort of the, guidelines. Can the DOE sort of make sure that they are leveraging their expertise to share with districts, because districts are really hungry, and we know that all of our districts really want to do a great job for our students. I do want to go back to something that that Senator Ruiz mentioned around the fact that our districts are flush with cash, and our state is quite flush with cash, to be quite honest with you, with regard to education recovery, because of our ARPA funds and our ESSER funds that came from the feds and have come through the Department of Education and has been disseminated in large part to our districts. And so if you want to think about it, it's kind of like districts winning the lottery, to be quite honest with you, in terms of some of the amount of dollars that they have gotten, and specifically earmarked for learning recovery. There are also dollars that are specifically earmarked for mental health for our students. And I did see a question about mental health for our students and how that factors into things. And so I did want to give folks on the panel an opportunity to respond. Feel free to do that. Mrs. Fraser, as well as Mr. Emigholz, as someone formerly in the classroom, and also thinking about what are the implications for the workforce. I didn't want.
Paula, you muted yourself inadvertently in the middle of that.
So
I don't know what happened there, because I did not mute. I was talking about the fact that somebody did mention mental health. And that we are flush with cash, and we do have a lot of dollars to be able to spend in lots of different ways. And some of that ESSER money and ARPA money for districts is specifically earmarked for mental health. And so I did want to give anyone on the panel certainly an opportunity to respond to any just any thoughts about the mental health of our students and how that may factor into how we move forward in terms of addressing their needs.
So I'll say that certainly in the social service sector, we've always recognized that when people come in for services, maybe they're having housing challenges or they're looking for a job. It's not just one thing they need, right? So it's the intersectionality of all the disparate impacts that families are going through, and children feel that too. So if they're facing eviction, which is an eviction crisis we have right now, families being eviction, that greatly impacts children's ability to perform in the classroom too, because their family is unstable, they're moving, they're going to another district, they're, maybe a school and different learning environments. It's very stressful and challenging to children, and certainly COVID has certainly provided an opportunity, a lens to see that children bring those same issues into the classroom that they have at home. So we see that. So for a holistic model and holistically helping families, you have to think that a test is only part of the picture about a child, right? It doesn't show the whole thing, the whole child, and helping the whole family. So we can help the child. A lot of times we focus on providing services to the child, but that child is in a family and that child is in a community. And so I would just say, in terms of the mental health, it's sort of community health and community well-being that also has to be addressed, and not just in the classroom or just the test. So hopefully in terms of the community development space, what we're doing to make communities safer, I would say crime and safety, all of those issues have significant impact on young people. And we know from young people that we see in our program, you'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't be surprised if you asked in a classroom or room, how many know someone who has been shot, or I knew one of our clients had 23 people she knew died from COVID, who experiences that. And just like that client experience, that children and those families experience it as well. So certainly mental health is something that has to be considered. How those resources get deployed is really something that I'm hoping that, as Senator Ruiz said, getting that data and those results, that you can start to say, where should the money be deployed? So disparate impacts. Every community was impacted, but some communities were impacted more than others. And in this case, if you're impacted more than others, you should get more resources. So the Abbott districts have to fight all the time fighting for the resources in these communities. And now you have a pandemic on top of it. So we're not supposed to get additional resources to address those issues. So I definitely think in terms of the mental health, it's broader than just the students in the classroom. It's really community wide. And hopefully those issues can be addressed as well.
I think.
Thank you so much.
Can I piggyback there a little bit? Because I think the legislature was very active in when the administration announced that they wanted to eliminate the traditional youth-based mental health programs that so many of our students are familiar with. We were very vocal. Fortunately, that those programs have been preserved with the intent of also growing the system and scaling it up so that there's greater accessibility for students. But like the teacher shortage, during the pandemic, we saw that even if you had insurance, accessibility to mental health care providers shrunk even lower because it was such a discipline of so few people that people were just taking clients based on cash, right? So it became one of these, can you access a mental health professional or a doctor or a social worker? Can you get an appointment? Do you have insurance? Do they take insurance? Never mind if you're on Medicaid. So I know that some of us are looking at these basic things. Medicaid reimbursement in the state, bringing more professionals into these fields, because this is also an area that has a severe shortage in these spaces. And how do we do these things? Because I think both the chairman and Dr. Davis spoke about this a little bit. We have to be creative the way this country did many moons ago. For a very long time, the federal program said to people, come to the higher ed community. We're going to pay for you to go to school as long as you can make yourself to teaching in a specific school district or in a specific discipline for several years. We did a little bit of that and put a couple of $1 million into this program, but we have to scale it up. We should do the same thing for mental health professionals and scale it up so that then after we create this workforce that we've supported and developed financially, that they go out and do that public service, and that is the greatest return on investment. So that, Senator Gopal and I put money in the budget now 2 consecutive cycles for the Department of Education to partner, because no department is equipped to do this by themselves. And no one is ever saying it. Go out and find yourself the best practitioners to collect all this information. Tell us how we're spending the money. The thing is that we do this, we draft pieces of legislation to help guide, show us how Vivian is spending her money. Maybe she can teach Paula or teach Teresa that this is the better way. It takes so long that I'm afraid that by the time we get these reports, it'll be 3 years, 5 years post, and you lose sight of it. One thing that Senator Gopal said is great, because I talked about this for a long time. DOE should be the think tank for innovation for the state. It should not be a level of bureaucracy. It should be a supportive system for every school district and every parent, and somehow it never functions that way because of changes of administration and all the things that he pointed to. But during the pandemic, we saw all the heads of state gather at a specific time every single day to talk about what we were going to do to help save lives. If we do not take that same approach with our school, then this whole conversation and the achievement gap and all the things that we were facing before, and trauma and schools and children with mental health issues and employability and the criminal justice system. I mean, we will be stuck in the Scooby-Doo run, right? Like Scooby-Doo and his team used to take off and never run anywhere. They would just stay stuck in the same place. And so, it's frustrating and it's heartbreaking, and it is terrifying, all in the same thing, because I work in government all the time, but I come from a government that we say we're going, and Vivian can testify to this, we're going to do this, the shovel goes in the ground, and then we produce that tangible thing. Somehow on the turnpike, that kind of sentiment of urgency gets lost.
Thank you. And, I want to say that as an educator, I think that when you think of the medical field and when we look at COVID, and I was on my Facebook every day because I wanted to see the governor talk about where are the case counts. Mayor Baraka in Newark talked about, here are the hot spots. Here's what we need to do. And here's where we're deploying resources. And that level of urgency is very clear when we look at sort of medicine. But in my profession of education, we don't always think about it in real time with that same sense of urgency. And so I really want to thank you, Senator Ruiz, for saying that, because that really is the power of being able to look at the data to say in real time, like, whoa, stop the presses. Here's what we need to do next. Here's where we need to, be thinking about. Here's what we need to be looking at. Here's a bright spot. Here's where we need to ring the alarm. I do want to go to a question. And by the way, let me just say, I don't know if you've been tracking the questions, but we have one of the most engaged audiences of any panel that I have done. And so I just want to say that folks here in the state of New Jersey care so much about education, and that is very clear from all of the questions that continue to come in. And I want to go to one of those right now, where someone asked a question about grade inflation and said that, that there is a grade inflation problem, in K-12 education, and wondering about how can we bring more attention to that. And so the idea that, my child may be getting an A on their report card, but it may not necessarily be indicative of the extent to which they are meeting, let's say, the grade level standard that they should be meeting. And so as we think about this standardized testing conversation, how might we be able to sort of address that grade inflation piece to the extent that that is a reality in some of our schools?
I think, Paula, I can touch upon that, but I can also go back a little bit. I want to try to synthesize a little bit of the conversation. You talked about the billions of dollars that we have from the American Rescue Plan, and I couldn't agree more with everything talked about mental health and wellness. But I think the state should seek and push for a strategic plan on spending that money to improve education and workforce development. And we've seen other states put hundreds of millions of dollars. New York State, our neighbor, saw health data said there's a healthcare workforce shortage. They put hundreds of millions of dollars into healthcare workforce, whether it's the teaching workforce, whether it's the mental health workforce, whether it's the manufacturing workforce, the hospitality workforce, you name it, but put money into that, put money into improving our schools, have a plan, take the CARES Act, take the American Rescue Plan Act, the money that's still there. I would love to see the legislature, and I know Majority Leader Ruiz said similar remarks in the Budget Committee, have a plan so that we're holding accountable for the use of these one-time funds for one time, and like thinking about Chairman Gopal's high dosage tutoring idea, like your one time spending as much as possible to make a difference and get the maximum bang for your buck. I worry that we haven't seen the plan that we all want, and we haven't seen the strategy, we haven't seen the vision. We're seeing kind of dribs and drabs, and a lot of it is going for excellent things and great things, all of which we would support individually. But I want to see a plan. I want to see something that's going to optimize how we use this money. And getting to grade inflation, I think the business community, we want to see people that are qualified for the jobs that are out there. And there's a host of jobs, a host of different pathways, on-ramps and off-ramps to get to the different kind of jobs that are out there, require a lot of different experience, the skill sets and education. But it's the qualifications and the skills that they have that matter. Getting the A versus getting a C doesn't make you more qualified and ready for work. It's what you're getting out of there. And I'm a big fan of rigor. I think we need rigorous education. We need to be having high standards, and we need to hold people accountable to reach those high standards so that they are ready for the world of work and they are ready for what they're going to be asked to do when they get out there into the workforce. We have to make our degrees matter. We have to make our moving from one grade to another matter. And I think that matters for employers, so that they know if I'm hiring somebody with a high school degree, coming out of a VOTEC school, coming out of a VOTEC and going into an apprenticeship school, that matters and means something, and therefore I'm going to get something in the workforce. And we hear that they're having trouble finding that person that has those skills. And so getting the A isn't necessarily helping get somebody those skills. We don't want people dropping out. And so you have to find the balance there to avoid the dropouts. But at the same time, we want to make sure that people are advancing, but getting the skills they need and properly advancing.
Thank you so much. You know, I do want to just point out that one of the ways also that we can use standardized testing to think about the grade inflation piece is that we can ask our school districts, and I'm saying this to all of the parents in the audience, we can ask our school districts to make sure that they're giving us a sense. My student got an A. How close are they to the standard of where they should be in fourth grade? They're in fourth grade. They got an A, you know, based on the work that they did in class. But how does that line up with what the state standards are? So for example, if you're looking at a school where, let's say you have, you know, let's say half the students in your child's class, you know, is getting A's, but only 10% of those students have shown proficiency on the state assessment, then that lets you know that there's a level of mismatch. And it doesn't mean that those students are not doing hard work and they're not trying their best, but it does mean that they are not as close to the standard of where they should be for their grade level. And so families should have a sense of that. And so that really underscores the value of standardized tests, because as a teacher, I always tell people, teachers invented tests. We all know that, right? We're the ones we're teaching our students. By golly, we want to know, right, how much they are learning. But the difference with the standardized assessment is that it is the same test delivered to the students under the same circumstances. If you're a teacher and you've delivered a standardized test, you have to read the instructions, you have to give the same setting. And so that is really what helps to give you a sense across the spectrum, whether you're in Montclair or Milburn or Camden or Newark or wherever you are, we can get a sense of how you're doing. And so I think that can help to flatten the concerns that we may have about grade inflation and things of that nature. And so I do want to now go back to another question from our audience, and that says NJ, may have the best schools on average, but the standard deviation is huge, meaning that there's a gap between the best and the worst. And so I do want to sort of, talk about that from the standpoint of, how do we make sure that certain students are not invisible? Because the danger of a single story, the danger of saying that our state is number one in education, or number two in education, number three in education. First of all, yeah, let's pat ourselves on the back. Come on, we're New Jersey, and that is great. What is also part of that story, which is obscured by the high level data, is the fact that there is huge achievement gaps within that within that data set. What we also know is that students lost learning, but they didn't all lose it at the same rate. So our students who are in the highest quartiles, who were already achieving at a high level, they may have lost a few points, and I'm talking here about the NAEP because we don't have the state data. They may have lost 3 or 4 points on the nation's report card test. But the students who were in the lowest quartiles, they didn't lose 3 or 4 points. They lost 12 points, 14 points, 16 points. And so we know that the losses have not been equal. And so if we see that at the state level, then that is even more alarming and something that we have to think about. I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that in terms of, as we think about high dosage tutoring or other kinds of interventions, how we want to deal with that achievement gap issue. I will give an opportunity before we move to another question. Okay.
Sorry, Paula. I think on talking about the achievement gap, talking about learning loss, the achievement gap was always there. And as we've said, we've seen it, and maybe it's been exacerbated or just brought to the forefront because of the pandemic, but it was always there. And there are always issues in our education system. I think some of those issues in New Jersey, even though there's a lot to be proud of, we need a super strong workforce. We need to overperform in our workforce, our education system, because New Jersey is a difficult state to do business. And if our employers can't find the talent in New Jersey that they can find in other states, then they're not going to do business here, and we're not going to grow and create jobs and increase state revenue and grow the economy the way we all want. Our workforce is more important in New Jersey than in other states, because other states have other factors that make doing business easier. We rely upon that. When you talk about why you want to do business in New Jersey, well, it's location, and it's the fact that we have a talented workforce. That talented workforce is not ubiquitous throughout the state. It's not everywhere. It's lacking in certain areas. We need to lift that up, or else our employers in certain parts of the state are going to not succeed the way we all need them and want them to.
Thank you for that. And that scares me. Like, that really frightens me, right? When you say, like, we have these jobs in New Jersey, we want to make sure that our residents are poised to be able to take on those jobs, so that way they can be able to self-actualize and have a full life and the life of their dreams, and be able to stay here in our state. And so I think that is just so important when we think about the workforce. One of the things that NAEP has told, one of the ways that they've looked at that data is that they are predicting that if we're not able to close some of these learning gaps that have emerged from what we've experienced, that we can expect a lower GDP. So literally our economy of our country will be impacted by the fact that we have students who ultimately will enter the workforce with a lower level of educational competency to be able to tackle some of the kinds of roles that we need in order to keep the meters running and to keep our society going and moving forward. That is a really important piece. I want to jump here to a question.
Can I just jump in there for a second? Because the one thing that we did have that was presented to all of us was the Start Strong assessment, which we know is not the same data, to be able to deep dive, but at least it gave us a picture early on, which I thought was a good way that the department was going. We know that all districts do an intro assessment. Everybody utilizes some different kind of map testing, and they do an interim. Part of the problems here is that all districts are doing this. So it's not like we're requiring them to do anything else, but nobody's reporting up that information, and we don't have a uniform. I've always said, why wouldn't we just buy one thing, give it free to all the districts to use, so that we're all using kind of those quick checkpoints? Because those kind of the map assessments, a child goes on, doesn't even know that they're really taking a test. It's in real time. The teacher can see the printout. Those kind of things, which I think would be helpful when we think about the future of where we're going to move strategically as far as navigating policy and trending and real-time data, if in fact we don't get this statewide assessment system more coordinated for what its purpose was, which is to help the school, the family, the student, and the teacher leader. But what Start Strong said to us very early was, and for me, this is always my focus. I even drafted a bill specifically focused on third grade. We all know, and in the educated workforce, that from the womb to third grade, you learn to read. From third grade to the rest of your life, you read to learn. If you do not have that fundamental skill of reading, you will be dealt with obstacles for the rest of your life, never mind all these other issues that we're compounding on. And so we never looked at that. And so I say that to everyone who's listening to this, and then think about what the numbers that were presented to us. Close to 50% of all New Jersey students in that demographic were below grade reading level and in math. And then when you parse back, it was 75, 76% for African-American and Latina students in the state. Third grade.
And so what you're speaking to there, Senator, is that we have assessments of learning, but we really also have assessments for learning. And so Start Strong was an assessment for learning, if you will, which is kind of really to give us a sense of, like, especially at the time at which it's administered, what does this tell us about how we need to be structuring our instruction, small groups, how do we think about our instruction given what this data is telling us, in these first few weeks of school?
Paula, I have a point to connect on as it relates to standard deviation just quickly. I think about the concept of a rising tide lifts all boats, right? And so what we're talking about here is a really a statewide collective approach to understanding how quickly and often can we access an array of data, right, on our young people, both academic, state performance data, social emotional data, so that we can lift all boats, right? And a workforce that will then be developed that can support the future. And so I think about what our parents here in Paterson are talking about. And you know, there are marginalized communities that don't have access to certain resources, so their boats can be lifted and they can be a part of the rateable base in the future, right? And so I hear their voices being echoed here and lifted up by Senate Majority Leader Ruiz and Senator Gopal. And so I hope that we do have some families here in Phillips that are listening, and they can hear that what they're talking about goes beyond the walls of our school for their young people, so that we can be a part of the top tier, so to speak, and see that our needs are equitably being met based on the resources that are available. So I just want to echo that point and make that connection.
Thank you. I would be
like that, like what you said around the third grade, you know, so if you look at the test scores when they had them even in fourth grade, and you talk about achievement gap, so you see the gap at fourth grade, it only grows. It gets larger by the time they get to high school. And if you can't read in fourth grade, you can't do algebra in eighth grade. So really being able to put those resources, the Center Teresa, at the early intervention is really important, so that you can address the problem before it gets bigger. And so I think, you know, certainly the whole goal around having young people all reading on grade level by grade 3 is sort of a simple goal, right? Something everybody can sort of embrace and get around, but it also has long-term implications for preparing the workforce and even being able to access higher wage jobs and higher critical skills in STEM and other fields.
Indeed. And just know that JerseyCAN, we have been thinking a ton about reading and making sure that students across our state have access to the skill of reading. And there are very many ways that we can be doing more for that. And so that will be a conversation that will be front and center in 2023. We have more than half of the states in our nation have passed legislation that really define how students need to be taught how to read, and that way is the way that students can best learn, that we can get the largest number of students literate and able to read. So that includes phonics and phonemic awareness and other aspects of reading, because reading really is, you know, there is a science to it. And I can tell you, because I spent my undergraduate education learning how to teach. And one of the biggest things that I learned how to do was how to teach reading. And I stayed up many a night learning and understanding the intricacies of the English language. And so children, you know, it's very important that we pay attention to how students learn how to read. And so we will be continuing that conversation here at JerseyCAN in a very major way. But I cannot close this off and get to, you know, I know time is running out, but there was one question that we must address. And I know we have parents in the audience, and a parent said, what can we do as parents? What can we do to put, you know, pressure? You know, is it on the district? Is it on the DOE? Is it on my teacher? What is the role that we can play? We're here, we're ready to go. Put us to work. How can we be instrumental in moving this forward? Please, panelists, weigh in. Parents want to know what to do.
I think the parents can help raise their voice around getting these test scores and getting, you know, I mean, I think that's what we need to put pressure on DOE and for the release of these scores. And then when the scores are released, really, I think we could have sessions around explaining the results, making sure that your school and your district actually spend time explaining what the results mean. So you can ask for that. You can say, we've gotten these test scores. We want to know what that means for our children and what it means for where our children are. So that's something that parents definitely can do. And you can organize it and go right to your principal and go to the district and demand it.
Thank you so much. You know, I think that is important. I think that I think it was writer Alice Walker who said, you know, that the biggest challenge that we have with power is recognizing that we have power. And so, in fact, our parents, as citizens of our local communities, you know, we have power as parents, we have power as citizens of our state, and that we can raise our voices to say that this is something that's important to us. And we can contact the Department of Education and we can ask them. We can also attend school board meetings, we can attend state board meetings, we can really sort of just make our voices heard and say, this affects all of us. And so thank you so much for that question about parents. And I also want to shout out our JerseyCAN parent fellows. I know some of them are in the room. We have a parent fellowship and so many engaged parents across the state of New Jersey. We have teacher fellows who also care deeply about using their leverage that they have in their local school communities. So want to also shout out our JerseyCAN teacher fellows who are just such special practitioners in our classrooms. And so I'd like to give an opportunity for our panelists to be able to provide some sort of closing remarks as we get ready to close out this evening. I also want to thank other legislators who are in the room. I know Assembly Member Victoria Flynn is in the room, and I want to welcome you and thank you so much for joining us, and everyone else that is here. And if we can go ahead and begin closing remarks, that would be wonderful. Let's start with you, Chris.
Thank you, Paula, and thank you again, everybody that's here tonight and spending your evening with us on this critical issue. I mean, if we don't get our schools right, then our whole state is not going to succeed the way we want. Our economy is not going to create. We're not going to have the jobs that we want. And we have a lot to be proud of. A lot, whether it's the great work that Vivian or the Urban League does, the great work that Phillips Academy and Dr. Davis do and charters throughout the state. And we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the levers of addressing the achievement gap, charter schools and the school choices that students have in many of our urban areas where sometimes they need more choices is a big part of that. And the great work that's been done in the state legislature by Chairman Gopal and Majority Leader Ruiz. But we need to do more. And we need that data to figure out exactly where we need to focus the new levers, where we need to focus new reforms, new interventions, new innovations, as Majority Leader Ruiz said. So I think the data is going to be instructive when we do see it, and focusing whether it's on the special ed students that might have been left out and missing and not getting the service they needed during the pandemic, whether it's on English language learners, whether it's on communities of color, whether it's on particular school districts that some school districts we know were very responsive and did exactly what they should have done in a very, very challenging period. And some school districts didn't have the leadership and didn't focus on some of the vulnerable students the way they needed to. So we want to find out where those gaps are, and we want to address those. And if we do that, then the business association is going to be very happy. And we want to see focused interventions addressing this. And that's going to lift up everybody. We want to focus on lifting up all students and all schools and all teachers. And so happy to be part of the process to get us there.
Thank you so much. Spoken from the business community, the folks who are going to be hiring our students in the years ahead to keep our state running. Thank you so much. Dr. Davis, I'm going to pass it to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I want to thank everyone here also for really giving your time and your voice and your thoughts. And thanks to our audience that probably sitting around their dinner tables right now and enjoying the show. I think about effective leadership and instruction and how they both start really at a base from accessing, understanding, and using data to make data-driven decisions. And you can't do that without reliable, valid, and accessible data. And so leaning into the understanding that while the data may be dismal, we want to suspend all targeted blame or anything of that of notion, and understand that we're all in this together. And the data will tell us what our young people need, who they are they making progress, and where we can take them. And the more we can do that based on corrective action roadmap and guideposts that tell us more often if we are heading in the right direction. It's better for all schools. It's better for all young people in all communities. And we need forums like this where leaders and individuals on the panel have access, right, within the community and access at the state level to be able to provide those resources and guide those resources so that on the ground, the amazing work that's happening in the classroom can happen where teachers' lives are much more balanced, and we're working in the best interest of them so that they can show up for young people also. And so it's important for me and our staff at Phillips that we see staff for who they are. We're building them up and we're giving them opportunity to be great for young people, because the young people are our priorities, but at the same time, our staff are our priorities as well. Self is a priority. And so the open dialogue that we're having here, let's have it at the school level. Let's have it at the community level as well, so that ideas can bubble up and really create what I would envision to be, right, a statewide professional learning community where forums like this are happening more often, and we're getting to action plans that we can realize and looking at that data and iterating in true Scrum, agile mentality so that our young people are succeeding, not only academically, but social, emotionally. So I just want to echo that point here. I appreciate being here, Paula. Thank you so much for putting this together, and your team. And I'm excited to maybe not even sleep tonight and work with our folks tomorrow on the ground.
Love it. Professional learning community so that we can learn from each other, and that way we can move forward. And teachers are always hungry for that. Thank you so much. Let's move right along to Vivian.
Sure. Right. Well, I know we're ending. It's sort of like you don't want to stand in the way of people's dinner and the meal, but I'd like to just say I really appreciate the opportunity to share with colleagues on this issue. And, you know, it's just the beginning. It's not the end. And I think what we need to focus on, if we talk about issues of equity, need to talk about disparate impact. And so that equity means not every child gets the same thing, but every child gets what they need. And that's something that I think if we can put that at the forefront of our discussions, it's not so much who has my cheese, who got my cheese, right? It's more, what does the child need? And what does the community need? And how do we make sure every child in the state of New Jersey gets what they need? And every community that was most impacted by the pandemic, that they get a balance of what they need. So if the impact was greater, then the resources they need to recover from that may also be greater or are also greater. And that should be something as a shared goal as we embrace equity in the state.
Thank you so much. And thank you also for being a co-host of this forum this evening. So glad to be able to have partnered with the Urban League. Thank you. And Senator Gopal.
Thank you, Paula, and thank you to JerseyCAN for putting this together. I think conversations like this are extremely healthy. I get frustrated a little bit when I see folks don't want to have a conversation at all, even if they have differing opinions. It's not healthy. It's not good. And I get frustrated the number of times someone says, you know, don't talk about learning recovery. We don't want to talk about it. And I don't think that's just not healthy. It's not a criticism of anyone. I have to emphasize this over and over. We have incredible educators in our state. We're blessed. And it's not an educator's fault if a child has incredibly difficult circumstances in their household. They can teach them all day and night. It's not going to make a difference. And I think that's a piece we're missing. And as all the panelists said, Chris, Vivian, Dr. Davis, and Majority Leader Ruiz have all said, we've got unique opportunities right now to spend our American Rescue Funds, to spend critical pieces to see what we can do to close these gaps. I am a really, really big advocate of high dosage tutoring. For those of you not familiar, please research. There's some really good studies out from Duke University, as well as many of our State Department of Education's out there. It's a 3-to-1 student teacher ratio, usually 30 to 60 minutes per session during the school year, utilizing current teachers. And we've seen it can have a really big impact on a child who just needs a little bit more help. And you know, every child is different. I growing up struggled with math, and I needed, you know, I wish I had some of the high dosage tutoring. It would have helped. I mean, it's not, you know, I can't overemphasize it. No one is criticizing anyone. No one is criticizing anyone. There's not criticism at all, not of school districts, not of teachers. This is just the circumstances we are. And choosing to not talk about it or ignore it does not help anyone. Even if some of the solutions we're talking about tonight may not be the best solutions, it's still important to have that conversation. So appreciate everyone being on. Two shout outs to Alex Hayes, who is one of my local Board of Ed members in Ocean Township, and as well as Rosa Achera, who lives in Ocean, who's helped me with a lot of my mental health legislation, who's with the state PTA. So there were just two people that I saw commenting that lived in my district. So just wanted to give them a shout out. So again, my appreciation to JerseyCAN and everyone here for all they're doing.
Incredible. Thank you so much. And thank you, Senator, for your sense of urgency and making sure that we had funding initially for our New Jersey Tutoring Corps, and for just being clear. And, you know, a lot of times, you know, it takes a while for money to get in the budget. It takes a while for bills to get passed. But when we have problems of this magnitude, we have to address them quickly. We cannot drag our heels. And I want to thank you for doing that, and for keeping that at the fore. And I'm going to now pass on to Senator Ruiz for final comments this evening.
Oh, thank you to everyone for the work that you do on a daily basis on this call, and for everyone who the work that they do respectively, whether they have a title or not. We all have titles in our lives, so it's just great to see all the questions that are coming up. I think my friend and the new chair of the Education Committee, that's something that you know, I kind of opened up with. We can't have this conversation and then have everybody run to say, well, what about this and what about that, to nitpick at every single word that's being discussed and then just retreat back to their specific corners and not do anything. You know, living in truth makes a lot of people uncomfortable, and it should be that way. But it doesn't mean that I'm right, you're wrong, you're right, I'm wrong. It means that we know that we can do things way better than what we're doing now. And so I think that's the fundamental core of this conversation in data. We live in a society that is test driven for the basis of just understanding everything. You go to your doctor for your physical examination. It is not, you know, hey, Ms. Cox, how are you feeling today? Yeah, that helps your assessment basis, but it is the blood work and everything else that goes along with it that can determine what the best outcomes will be for you. It's understanding that collecting data in our school systems is about taking the holistic approach to ensuring that we're providing the resources and the needs to the teachers, the children, and our school district. You know, a shout out to all of the teachers, and I said this, I mean, it was extraordinary when living rooms turned into learning labs immediately like this, even when nobody was talking about access to broadband and to computers. Teachers were going out of their way to turn the lights on for students as best as they could. But it's kind of that disconnect that even in the height of the pandemic, that it was like, all right, we're going to go to remote learning, and not fundamentally being steeped in the truth that we have households that don't have computers and didn't have broadband. And that conversation itself took a piece of legislation that was vetoed 100%. And then 6, 7, 8 months of some of us screaming at the top of our lungs until we developed a strategy and a plan. So what I would like to see coming out of this is, let's roll up our sleeves. Let's have the difficult discussions. Let's disagree on policy, but let's come with the understanding that and someone asked, it's the collective, that there are things that all of us can do to help to move this along. And I just pray that the sense of urgency that was presented during the pandemic in specific areas, whether it was the Department of Labor, the Department of Health, that we weigh in the same way with the Department of Education. If we don't understand that the greatest pandemic that we are facing right now is learning loss in the state, then wrap it all up, because it impacts every single facet of every component of our lives. It impacts you yourself as an owner of a property, as a neighbor, as an employee, as an employer, as a mother, a daughter, a sister, a principal, a mayor, an elected official, the chair of the education committee. It just matters. From 0 to 3, children learn to read. From that 3rd grade and beyond, we read to learn. If we don't focus on those common sense approach things, understanding that those are just some of the basic things, access to food, it's all of it. And it's so much, and you're never going to resolve it in an hour and a half, but we have to talk about it. I talked before the Abbott decision was struck, and it was in a child development center. And I had a young man who would come in and eat 2 or 3 breakfasts, right? And I understood why that was happening, right? It was food insecurity. And then when we developed a better strategic program, that student was working and functioning better to the best of their abilities. But it has to be in real time. And someone posed a question, which was awesome. Are we presenting the SLA in the best way? Can we do better? Certainly, we're not getting the test results when we should be getting them, because getting them when we're getting them doesn't help the teacher, it doesn't help the child, and it doesn't help the student. So there should be a whole reevaluation as to what we're doing, but saying no tests and no data collection is not the answer.
It is definitely not the answer. And I'm going to close right now with a little bit of a personal story. I have been training for a half marathon for the past 4.5 months. And I had my annual physical a few weeks ago. And because of a test, my doctor found that I had a little irregularity in my heart, specifically my aorta, and sent me to get more tests, and looked at the data that test was showing them, and said to me, hey, guess what? You can't run this half marathon. Your heart is not equipped for vigorous exercise. You can walk it, and you can maybe do a light jog, but you can't run. And I think about what would it mean, because this race is happening this weekend, and I am going to walk because I do want to have that. I do want to have that hardware. I want to have that little medal. But what would it mean for me to get on that course and try to run for 13.1 miles, not having those test results and not knowing what it meant for how I should be behaving moving forward? I don't know. Maybe that could have saved my life. And many times we do not think about tests as being important. Tests are not the be all and end all. I think we've established that. But having information and having the power to act on that information is what our children deserve. And we're the grown-ups, y'all. We're the ones that vote. We're the ones that make the decisions. We are the ones, we owe it to them to act on the information that we have. And where there's a void of information, we owe it to our children to ask for that information. It's not personal, okay? But it's like the young people say, keep that same energy, okay? We had energy for COVID. Keep that same energy for the education of our children, because they deserve it. Thank you all so much. Please follow us on all social media platforms. We will continue this conversation, and we want to hear from you. Thank you, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.